In Memoriam, Professor Gertrude Falk, 24th of August 1925 to the 9th of March 2008. Prologue. I'm trying to cope with Gertrude's death, but the pain is not of this world. The very place where she sat seems to heave with her presence, and the words on the placards call out her name. I am left with her life, and I don't know what to do with it, and nothing again will ever be the same. So short the time that she left behind, yet its unending echo magnifies my mind. She exists now only as a memory, an infinity from which I cannot break free. I'm so tired, Gertrude. Wait for me. Forever young. Gertrude, how shall I protest in the days to come, without you by my side? Gently you stood before me, unfaltering and unforgotten, familiar and yet sudden, and as though from another world. Out of the distance and the disarray, you quietly took the helm. You knew more than we knew of the time ahead, the rain that never stopped falling through the summer of your last year, the end left to stand there, loitering before you. Love that is the pain that is not of this world. You can't stay, Gertrude. Well, I'm not staying anyway. Throw away words the cold could not allay. You cannot go like this without even saying goodbye, with no one there beside you to quietly take your hand. Under a low-strung, sheer and empty year, the sky seems nearer now. Fragments laid aside or casually left behind veer as an incoming black tide across the chasms of my mind. Nothing is here to show that you were near. Yet you knew 2 months before you needed to, just what you had to do, and nothing could dissuade you from the end. Your life, the damaged goods that would not mend. Tomorrow something you could not attend, as death became another new-found friend. You sat there right through November, until we were forced to turn you rudely away. Forever young you sat there, for far too long that last afternoon, mute and watching, endlessly weighing the clamorous hours, the silent vigil before you. And now it was too late, and still you chose to wait, borne along on a listless ebb tide, on some remembered unlit shore beyond us. We would not hear your laughter any more. So short the time she left behind, yet its unending echo magnifies my mind. Moments already, as though long ago, sudden as softly falling April snow. These days and their kind will not come again. From the limits of language to explain without fear how for a few short hours you are here beside me on the bench once more, beckoning or trawling through history, how even in the ashes of your beer you never saw the barriers taken down, or the protest left at half-mast since. You were still alive when the lane opened up, but you didn't live long enough to see it, or the wall. All there is to tell of your last summer, or the unfinished paper that was meant to have crowned your whole life, left clamorous with the sound of us. However long the protest has to run, I shall never see your approach again, though I watch for it for the rest of my life, left to needlessly wait around in a world that has lost its meaning and is wholly empty now. There is no answer in the gathering shadows, only the lowering echo of your name. Lethe is where you stand, and you cannot help me now. I'm left with your life, and I don't know what to do with it. An infinity from which I cannot break free, struggling just to find what it was you wanted to leave behind. I'm so tired, Gertrude. Wait for me. What a time it is here. Only a song or chance keeps the poem alive. And yet there is nothing to fall back to, except an incoming, levelling ebb tide, a distant, depleted, leftover day that refuses to go away. How shall I find you again, or out of the cold wind fashion your laughter? I who came to know you more than I knew myself, am helpless without you, and silent now before an endless echo which clings and cleaves and keeps the words at bay. A mute, infinite sound, and while all that is known begins to fray, as darkness once that on the surface lay. They came like thieves in the night, in the full flare of morning, and they tore you down, trampling over your image in the lane. Gertrude, there was no one left to fight. All the placards were gone, every single one. Only the plastic fastenings were left, still clinging forlornly to the railings. It hurts, and there is nowhere to go with the pain. My spirit breaks beneath the burden, for I have carried you to the protest since your death, as each day became a weight too heavy to carry, as I willed you just to stay alive long enough to be the inheritor of your memory. What was the meaning of it all? In vain I look for your approach in the lane, still tremulous with what you gave to us back then, shuffling quietly, bowed in the rain, an unfaltering dynamo calling out to us, or just simply silently urging us onwards to yet another tomorrow. Left, forever bereft, I grapple with the pain, never to see her face again, even as the placards seem to assail, only to fall back to no avail, even as they call out her name. The last of the great and good of Hampstead, the empty railings echo now instead. Gertrude, I have lived through such a time since then. Your shadow left in the empty lane. How they came for the placards again and again, leaving us with no respite, no shelter from the storm, with nothing at the bottom of Pandora's box, nothing. And out of nothing I shall conjure my rage, rage for her trampled image in the lane, and rage for the desecration of all she was alive for. Nothing can assuage the fear she knew in her last year, or the litter torn from the spirit of the age. There is an unpaid debt of simple tears owing to her, the sum of all my fears. Gertrude, they waited until you were in your grave before they came for the placards. They could not confront you in your life, so they tore the protest down behind your back. They say that everything can be replaced, but something has been effaced forever. I let them take them, and I let you down, and the simple joy that we once knew has gone. Forever young, and bowed under her ancestral pain, I'll never know her kind again, her bequeathed obituary. Flow, river, flow, and convey that lady. At the end, all she wanted was to be free, and that's the way it turned out to be. It is not us anymore now, but me, and the lane has been left empty for a while. How casually I was to break under the burden of it all, leaving you behind without even a look back as you approached in the distance of dreams. I wake only to the reality that time no longer matters anymore. Its unreachable equilibrium, a seesaw of years, with nothing left to level out the score. The hours are by far too many. They were always too many. Between then and now, I could not live them all, line by line, and yet destined to fall, day by day, with my back against the wall. Day by day, they took away your poem, fastened to the railings for the world to see, the council's final ignominy. How could they then have sunk so low, while still in the axis of her dying shadow. For we were not given the time between even her death and its diagnosis. And before 2 months had run their course, the enforcers arrived in the lane by force. But she would not be there to see, as though she knew already the atrocity that would unfold untold in the future, enacted there in the heart of Hampstead, the consummation of our daily dread. You threw your mantle around us, because you knew the council would not come for you. You could not know it was your last summer, but you knew how vulnerable we were, just to be there with the right to protest. Yet you never shared this with us, either after or before. Mutely you sat there, bowed with your knowledge, right through November. And after, on the ward, your concern was for us, questioning quietly what would happen when the lane would be finally opened up on a day you would not see. We need you on the bench, Gertrude. My last words were replied to with silence held fast. The protest could only founder without you. Without a word, the council took them, every single placard, one by one, and I let them take them, and I let you down. How shall I follow in your footsteps now, when everything about you made my life complete, and when nothing is what it seems? Your description of vision lit up my mind, and with a single word the sequence for the origin and the end. I heard their echo resonate through the future. Gazing into the mirror of your life, you gave me my own reflection to keep. Not its last diminishing in the depths of a mirror's horizon, beyond the utmost reach of the long promontory of night, but someone, somehow, enough to stand fearless in the light. And in my dreams you were the Alpha and the Omega, in a world where nothing is what it seems. Destined only to founder without you. Where do I go from here? Here where I sat with your ashes on the bench and was oblivious to the cold, and aware only that these days and their kind would not come again. From the limits of language to explain just what it was that you meant to us back then. You were the driving force behind the hours, which were heading towards a perfect storm at the end of each day. At the helm always, you took control and steered us through all the way to the other side. So high we were at the end, so high that we never saw you waving goodbye. I had to leave the protest behind in order to grieve for you and to confront the silence threatening to overwhelm me in its wake. There are no words for loss, only the thudding of its aftermath down the corridors of the mind, without even an exit sign to be seen. Full 9 months it took for the first cry to be heard, with not so much as a word to be said to anyone. Grief keeps in thrall its own counsel, while the world goes on its way, while I try to believe Gertrude is dead, that she won't come down the lane, furious with Glenda, the end hidden among us. Where do I go from here, with everything left behind me, and nothing in its place? How shall I follow in your footsteps now, when love is the brief equilibrium in the balance of time, when the only way is the way back? How shall I ever remember you when it is easier to forget? And there is no answer in the gathering shadows. There is only the lowering echo of your name, your torn and trampled image in the lane, now urging me on, if only to explain those days in the rain, how sometimes after she would try to make us ache with laughter. Those days in the rain, when there is no way out of the labyrinth of language, when silence is a lasting and resounding echo. I remember those days again, with you beside me on the bench once more. How even in the aftermath of your ashes, words flowed as a river, bearing us both along, and into another world where death no longer seemed to matter, a place where a poem was enough for the boatman and the coin to convey a life. It was so hard to come back from there, with nothing to bring with which to belong. Existence left to barter for a song. Even now, after so long without you, I am torn between my own fear on the one hand and a need to get back to the lane, to take up where you left off on the other. And I too have been an island unto myself, not knowing whether to leave that shore, or even if I wanted to leave any more. But I know that time stood still for a while, allowing me to follow after, knowing full well I could never catch up then, or ever draw up level with the future. For it was gone, night or day if at all, I could not tell, only that time was ineffaceable. How I longed to be done with those days, and the violence in the lane after your death, and which I could neither confront nor ignore. Somehow it was all mixed up with all you were alive for, all you had stood for. An endless maze deep inside, without any way out, without you by my side. Mute with the horror of it all. Even then, as the world was reduced to litter, just to be carried away at the end of the day, and the lane left wholly empty without her. She was gone, and yet I was left behind with the one true absolute good that I could lean on. There is nothing to search for now, except to find a way somehow through the shored up debris left far behind, as each day falls away from the momentum of it all. There is only the long ricochet in dreams, endlessly reaching for something, yet knowing full well that it can never be found, lasting, existing, paralyzing my mind, even as its memory once lit up the darkness of the world entire. In vain I call out the name of someone long consumed on their own funeral pyre. In the wreckage where a ship ran aground, there is no absolution to be found. At the furthest reach I trawl through the last scattered fragments of your life, while I try to assemble something to resemble a song, as your days slowly ebb away beneath their lowering echo. Between then and now, it was bound to happen. I stand in a resonating maze, still in no man's land, trapped between the mute hours as they attenuate untold, until time turns round on its heel, without as much as a word to throw for a passing echo. Paralyzed, in panic, and with nothing to say, except when fate becomes a cry inchoate, and enough to set a course by, the end signalling always its source. If only I had listened more closely, and not let the words just slip away like mercury to the ground. What I would give to hear you now, quietly narrating your stories, and sometimes repeated so many times I had even forgotten how they ended. The only refuge is then, and what I can recall. I hardly seemed to listen at all. We got so used to you, and we took so much for granted. The fragments left behind are all there is to remind us of how once you were here in the unfinished life we failed to hear. And the paper would be left unfinished, and left as something you had meant to do through that summer and never got round to. Each morning you'd leave for the medical library, your sole intent the final touches to a long-standing last paper to do with vision. You were so near and yet so far, and destined to remain there without any solution to crave for, or the outcome you so desired. For we lay in your path almost as an ambush each day, and however you might try to pass on by, you were forced to stay and save us, leaving us after with what you gave. You would try to keep the protest going by being there, scrupulously keeping watch until the last 2 months before your death, when its future became entangled in the endless thread of catastrophe that would first invade and then as it laid siege to your mind. Left to stay where you lay, felled to the core day after day, to no avail, for you could not be comforted. Even as we tried, unable to save you, all I could see was the empty bench and what you believed in left behind. Too afraid as you laid there even to cry, your life still unfinished, about to die. We who could not save you, either then or now, would be left with what you gave us for the rest of our lives. For in the minds of the living, memory lives on, and flows like a river bearing us along, and out of this world where echoes fall away, where nothing seems to matter, and nothing is what it seems. Day by day you lay, so afraid you were for yourself, so afraid in those last days at the end you looked out onto the world and everything was dire. Your life was so much more, something higher, an incandescent flame which would not tire. By saving us, you saved the world entire. The poem is a well from which to draw your story when suddenly it runs dry. Even so, I cannot understand why after a while it will not sustain me, waiting helplessly around, hour by hour, surrounded by the rim of horizon. I thread its course onto a string without source or ending, bewildered at the heart of distance and left with nowhere to go, silent in a drought of words without an echo, as I turn and turn about, as if stranded in a limitless desert, watching while the sand falls endlessly back from itself, yielding to its own low drone, the far wind moving over its surface, carrying me on its current to some far-off place, another life other than this, the colossal abyss of loss, and whether it is night or day, if at all, when the end is all that is known, yet known from what is left behind, from the fleeting interval of before, that the only duty we had was to each other. Love that is the pain that is not of this world. When I remember those days in the rain and the reckoning in the empty lane, days that were destined to be left in vain, that I can neither rescind nor explain. The colossal abyss of loss. It is no wonder I fell silent in the lane. There was nothing left with which to explain, and yet there was absolutely nowhere else I wanted to be. Something beyond my knowing was then bearing me along. Left alone with her last mortality, people passing to and fro saw nothing. Some indefinable part of myself was gone, and though the sword of sorrow hurt, I would then have to pull it out again, with no way out of the vector of pain. There was only the towering abyss above, not Gertrude, not her, not like this. Without her by my side, I was on my own, afraid of almost everything then, facing death in the past more easily than just being at the protest alone. Without thinking, I put up the placards in memory of her name, unable to cry or even how to wonder why. Bound about in endless stupefaction, softly I would call out her name, knowing full well there would never be an answer. There was only her lowering echo to reclaim, and a life which should have been, the protest left over as though in vain, as if its time would never come again. If I should bring the poem to an end, what then? You would not be a part of me any more. It would be like handing you over to untold anonymity, to people who never even knew you, who never heard you laugh or saw you try, unable to cry, lost in those last days. And if they should ask, how would I describe your brief goodbye, or the slow surrender after of a life unfinished, as you took your leave of this world, fitful, fearful, and still unready for the storm to come? I who sat with your ashes in the cold could not keep you then or leave you untold. What if my project should fail, which was to tell the world what happened in the lane back then? How a narrow pathway in Hampstead opened up while Gertrude was on the ward. She didn't live to see the barriers go, so long looked forward to all summer. And so she missed the 6-month siege after her death, when the council came again and again, and she never saw the morning when they took them, every one. She took on the managers head on, while her life drained away. She would do it anyway, for she wanted to change reality there for the world. And my ending is despair. As plunder, the placards had been destroyed, and then it was as though you'd been killed all over again, not by cancer this time, but trampled underfoot by those who were put there to care, who were supposed to know what they were doing, who did a good job that day. Gertrude, they did it because they could. I was at a medical appointment, and you could no longer be there. I left them out overnight to fit it all in, caught in an ambush without my knowing. Your image lay discarded as litter, forever young, unnoticed in the din, was pulled down from the railings in ruin. Your death had dealt the protest a mortal blow. By the time the council marched in for the final reckoning, the placards had already been destroyed. And as I tried to struggle on, they just kept on coming for the pitiful remnants left behind. A residual echo left to find, and the final stamping into the ground of an errant, lost, deracinated spirit. Whether the protest petered out, or it became a sudden derailment, it was enough to keep you from fading. As I looked for your approach in the lane, wind-torn fragments were flapping in the rain. We had saved the duplicate placards, but they had all been ripped down from the railings. The holes were torn, and their structure was gone, and with no way out and winter coming on, the alternative set still stolen, and the council still coming back for more, with no time to turn around in to mourn, I simply walked away from what had gone before, without even a last look back, leaving you behind, half out of my mind, with the untold human cost of it all. You were gone. It had been for nothing. And by then you had been too long in your grave. The placards were now too damaged to save. The protest had consumed Gertrude's last year. In the wake of her death, it had become my life's work, and though I looked in vain for her return, she would not be coming back again. There was no shelter to be had from the rain, no respite from her empty place in the lane, and where I sat with her ashes once, oblivious to the cold. Like a ship in the night, we foundered in the height of a perfect storm, going down. People passing to and fro saw nothing. At the helm She took the protest with her. Nothing could be saved, nothing. So much more. In the time I could have done so much more. For people passing, there was no protest. There was an appearance in name only, and a slow winding down after her death. The very placards which the council had effaced would remain wind-torn in the rain. So much so they could never dry out now, even then as the words called out her name. But the reality was so much more, a death and its double jeopardy, and all they had to do was wait. The council had nature on their side. An imminent winter was just around the corner, and I was slowing down with anemia. I could not be there in the lane after, without the words to say how I missed her.